Welcome to the Free Titan. Today I'm going to give a talk about Venus and specifically her expression found in Greek mythology as Aphrodite, as we find her in Homeric literature and Greek mythology, because a lot of the tales told about Aphrodite, who is Venus, who is the closest manifestation to Venus we have in the West, her stories have arisen organically through our collective consciousness. And as a Western goddess, she is more tuned into our society. Even though we are not ancient Greeks anymore, they are the forebears of our civilization via Rome, Europe, and now in the United States, and still in Europe, and the whole Western world, really. And so when we want to understand mythology and astrology, I think this is usually the best place to start when we're trying to understand the gods and the planets and what that means for us in our lives. Because when we try to understand the planets in a vacuum, they can be very abstract and elusive creatures. What is Venus? It's this astral body orbiting around the sun very fast. And so the connection to our world seems kind of tenuous at best. Like, what does this astral body have to do with my life? How can this planet affect love and beauty and grace in the world around me when, this planet is thousands of miles away? So what I like to do, I do think there is a more metaphysical connection between the planets and human beings, specifically through the energy centers in the body. So Venus in like yogic astrology is connected to the heart, or rather is the expression of the heart in astrology. Mars is the expression of the third energy center behind the stomach, which is fire and willpower, expressed by the planet or the god Aries. The throat is Mercury, which in all mythology rules communication, which is obviously what the throat energy center, even anatomically, it's what the throat, the function of the throat. So coming back to Venus, when we try to understand her, I have a good background in classical mythology because I studied classics, and so when I got into astrology, it was a very easy transition because I had a good intuition for what these planets really meant because I had studied the mythology behind them. And I think for anyone interested in astrology, starting with the mythology is actually the best and most organic way to wrap your head around what these planetary bodies mean for us. Especially in Greek and Roman mythology, I guess we can get into other mythologies as well in different times, but the strongest connection to astrology and even to the Western world today, I think, is found in Greek and Roman mythology. And for me, I find Greek mythology the richest. So Aphrodite the Romans renamed her Venus. They made it very straightforward for us. But the Greeks called her Aphrodite, and in astrology, she's the manifestation of Venus. And so she governs beauty, grace, romance, beguilement, even seduction, sex, romantic love. And in a lot of her mythology, she's very sort of flirtatious, and she doesn't always behave herself very well. So in most of the versions of her mythology, she's married to a very ugly god named Hephaestus. So her father Zeus, in some versions, Zeus is her father, married her to a sort of ugly god who is the blacksmith, but who is a brilliant craftsman and created all kinds of genius things. But he wasn't known to be very beautiful or a great lover or any of the things that Venus and Aphrodite are always known to be. So it's a kind of awkward relationship. But she wasn't faithful, and her paramour, her chief lover, was Ares, the god of war. So imagine like the most beautiful cheerleader. Her like actual relationship is with a not very attractive guy, but she's always seeing like the biggest jock on the football team or the basketball team, because Ares is sort of like the jock of the gods. So it's an archetype that plays out a lot in real life too. And so this dynamic between Venus and Mars takes on its own shape in all of the mythology. But to come back to Aphrodite and Venus in astrology rules the heart and rules matters of the heart, of love, of grace, of beauty, the love of beauty, which often comes with having a more open heart. I think the more open the heart is, the more we appreciate beauty in the world around us, even beauty in people and grace. And so in astrology, when we're looking at Venus, we're looking at romantic compatibilities, the way we might behave in a romantic relationship, how we would communicate in a romantic relationship, what we are expecting in a romantic relationship. And so Venus as Aphrodite is sort of more like if you had Venus in Taurus, or you had a lot of planets in Taurus. So Aphrodite as a goddess kind of represents the purest expression of Venus as Taurus. But Venus can express herself in many other ways, right? Like Venus in Pisces can be more profound, like more mystical. Venus in Virgo is very attentive to detail. It's very unlike Aphrodite. Venus in Capricorn could be very practical. Venus in Gemini is getting back to more like Aphrodite because Venus is very comfortable in Gemini. It's very flirtatious. It's very, very much into romance and romantic love and beauty. Same thing with Venus in probably Leo or Libra or Sagittarius, like a lot more sort of expansive, outgoing, flirtatious, fun signs. Venus will express herself more naturally in these signs, but she will also express the same weaknesses in these signs. So Venusian weakness could be frivolity or frivolity. It could be an excess of passion, an excess of romantic love. It could be lack of faithfulness. And so when we look at a lot of the mythology, Venus as expressed in mythology through Aphrodite, we find her to sort of typify this extreme of Venus that we find more in these signs that I just mentioned, like Libra and Gemini and Taurus. Like she's very passionate, she's very chaotic, she's creating a lot of chaos in a lot of these stories. And you know, she has quite a number of affairs, of lovers. And so but her real passion in life is beauty and love and just the enjoyment of life, which is what Venus represents naturally in sort of every system of astrology. And so when we read the mythology about Aphrodite, she's pointing us in that direction. And she's also pointing us to the weaknesses that this sort of extreme version of Venus can have. It can create a lot of drama. It can create a lot of problems. And so diving into the mythology more, if you're familiar with the Iliad, this is one of the greatest pieces of literature in the Western canon. It's about this story of the Greeks going to Troy to get back, at least apparently, to get back Helen, who was the queen of Sparta and the wife of Menelaus, the brother of Agamemnon. And so all the Greeks, this is maybe 1400 BC, plus or minus. I don't think anyone knows for sure, but it's a long time ago, well over 3,000 years ago. And so the Greek coalition, led by Agamemnon, goes to Troy, which is in modern-day Turkey. So this conflict between Greece and Turkey, which goes back thousands of years, maybe started during the Trojan War, but it still goes on today, the rivalry between Greece and Turkey. And during the time of the Ottoman Empire, the Greeks were some of the most diehard rebels against the rule of the Ottoman Turks, who ruled the Middle East for maybe 400 years, if not more. So it's interesting how this tension and this rivalry has played out through the centuries and even the millennia. But in this story, so this was the basis of the movie Troy. I think the Iliad has been turned into film many times, but the most recent and most well-known version was with Brad Pitt in the movie Troy. This is a very close approximation of the book, the Iliad by Homer. But in this book, one of the main characters, Paris, who is a prince of Troy, he gets a gift from the gods. And so he gets to choose between these gifts offered by the goddesses, and he chooses the gift offered, or the boon offered by Aphrodite. And Aphrodite's boon is that he will be with the most beautiful woman in the world, or that the most beautiful woman in the world will fall in love with him and run away with him. So it turns out the most beautiful woman in the world is Helen of Sparta, the wife of Menelaus. And so there's different versions of how it happens, but long story short, Helen falls in love with Paris and they run away, which was a very bad decision, politically speaking, because that was the queen of Sparta, of one of the most powerful countries, or at least part of the Greek alliance that existed. And so Menelaus, the offended Menelaus, he goes to his brother Agamemnon, who's the head of the Greek coalition, and they're treaty bound to defend each other's honor, I guess, or integrity. And so they all sail, 50,000 men sail. So they say 1,000 ships, there are 50 Greeks more or less on each ship. 1,000 ships sailed for Troy. And so this is where we get the saying that Helen had the face that launched 1,000 ships. And she also had the face that launched one of the greatest wars of the ancient world that we know of. So 50,000 Greeks sailed to modern-day Turkey. And in this cohort are the heroes Ajax, Achilles, Diomedes, Odysseus, the main protagonist in the Odyssey. And they go to Troy to win back Helen. Probably most people contend that it was just an excuse to expand their dominion in the Mediterranean, but that might just be a modern political take on it. Maybe back then their honor really was that important. And so anyway, the Greeks stay camped on the beach of Troy for 10 years because they can't conquer this fortress, which is quite impregnable. Anyway, so they get back Helen, but this is all a background to sort of show you in Greek mythology how powerful Aphrodite really is, how powerful the goddess of love is. This is just a backdrop for this point. And how powerful Venus is in all of our lives. She's beautiful. She's a force for chaos. She makes men lose their minds. She makes men make very bad decisions, or at least we could say irrational decisions that have dire consequences, politically, economically. And so Paris's love with Helen is one of the most famous and literary examples of how Venusian love creates chaos in the plot of life. And when you look at the lives of the people around you, unless you live in a box, you probably off the top of your head can think of several examples of how love, especially romantic love, probably especially of a beautiful person, makes people make very impractical decisions with their life and causes a lot of problems. And yet this chaos isn't necessarily a drawback. It isn't necessarily a bad thing, even though the masculine mind would usually label it as a bad thing. And interestingly enough, in the Iliad, Helen is always condemning herself as a bad woman. We don't need to use the language she uses, but it's not very nice. What she says is very self-deprecating. And so she's articulating this criticism of Venusian chaos. But what I think the point I really want to articulate here is that when people think of the planets in astrology, they think of Mars and Saturn, and maybe Jupiter or the Sun as being very powerful. But interestingly enough, Venus is often the one that sets the stage for the power struggle between the powerful planets and the powerful protagonists and the powerful men in our current events and in Greek mythology and in great literature. This could certainly be true of Shakespeare. This is certainly true of Homer. Even the sequel to the Iliad, the Odyssey, which is about a 10-year voyage from Troy back to an island off the coast of Greece called Ithaca, made by the protagonist Odysseus. One of his main motivations, probably his main motivation, is to see his wife, Penelope, who was so famously loyal to him for 20 years. 20 years. They had a son together right before Odysseus left to go to Troy. He fought at Troy for 10 years, and then he took 10 years to get home, which is a whole nother story. But this is also the power of Venus. So the animating force, in a way, of both of the arguably greatest pieces of literature in the Western world is romantic love. It is Venus. And the point I'm making is simply to not underestimate the power of romance, the power of chaos, the power of love. It might not seem powerful, but it often is the force that shapes the world to a certain degree. And I think maybe in a better world, it would shape our world more because we would be more attuned to Venusian grace and beauty. I'll read a short introduction from a Greek mythology book that I really enjoy about Aphrodite. Sing of Aphrodite, all you muses. Sing of her pale loveliness that no man can resist. Sing of the fair-crowned, laughter-loving goddess. And in Homer, she's often described as laughing. Like you can imagine like a beautiful woman just intoxicating everyone with her laughter. Born in the foam off Cyprus, wife of Hephaestus. Hephaestus is the ugly blacksmith that she's wedded to, and lover of grim Ares, the god of war. For her the seas grow calm, the meadows put forth flowers and butterflies, the storms abate. For her gardens bloom, in her train wild wolves and panthers follow with adoration in their eyes and tails wagging in submission. The dove is hers, blessed, smiling Aphrodite, weaver of charms, and her attendants are the Graces and Eros, who is love. And there's another passage I'd like to read to you from the Iliad. There's an interesting part in the Iliad when one of the great Greek heroes, Diomedes, he, backed by Athena, another one of the great warrior goddesses of the Greek pantheon, arguably the greatest goddess of the Greek pantheon, he is emboldened by her to fight the gods. And the first god, interestingly enough, he fights is Aphrodite. But this is because she is trying to take Aeneas away from Diomedes. Diomedes is about to kill one of the great Trojan princes, who interestingly later becomes the mythological founder of Rome. And his mother is Aphrodite. And Julius Caesar also traced his lineage to Venus, which is strange. You might have heard this in one of the many shows made about Rome. But Julius Caesar claimed he was a descendant of Venus. Now, no one actually believed, now or then, I don't think, that he was the son of the goddess Venus. But what he's doing is he's tracing his lineage back to the founder of Rome, the mythological founder of Rome, Aeneas, who is the son of Venus and Anchises. And he escapes from the rubble of Troy to at least in the mythology, to found Rome. And so in this book 5 of the Iliad, which is one of my favorite parts of the Iliad, Diomedes fights the gods. And not only does he fight Aphrodite, which is not really the most heroic feat, he's doing it because he's trying to get his kill, Aeneas, who would have been a very formidable opponent to kill. But so Aphrodite is kind of collateral damage in this. He's not actually going after her. But he does go after Ares, interestingly. So he's emboldened by the goddess Athena, and strengthened by her hand, he actually wounds Ares, who in the Iliad, Homer says he cries out with a voice of 8,000 or 9,000 men. But there's this interesting part in the Iliad when Diomedes is taunting Aphrodite. And so after he wounds her and she screams and she's bleeding ichor, or like the blood of the gods, they have this special blood in Greek mythology, he taunts her actually. And he says, daughter of Zeus. Aphrodite is sometimes called the daughter of Zeus. Sometimes she is a daughter of one of the Titans. But Homer refers to her as the daughter of Zeus. And for me, Homer is the gold standard for all Greek mythology. He says, daughter of Zeus, leave war and battle alone. Can you not be contented with beguiling silly women? If you meddle with fighting, you will get what will make you shudder at the very name of war. And I love when he says, can you not be contented with beguiling silly women? Like you can imagine a warrior on the battlefield covered in blood, just mocking the goddess of love, saying, can you not be content with beguiling silly women? What are you doing in this domain of like warriors and men and blood? Get out of here. And it's interesting that he says that because it reminds us why they're all there in Troy. Like this woman who's so weak in battle. You can't imagine a weaker character on the battlefield of Troy. And he's kind of mocking her as being weak and like incompetent in war. But he says, can you not be content with beguiling silly women? And in this case, it seems to be an obvious reference to Helen, who Aphrodite made fall in love with Paris. And this was the pretext for the whole Trojan War. And so on one hand, I just love the paradox here, because on one hand, he's making fun of her for being weak. But on the other hand, even in trying to throw this jab at her, he's reminding us that she in some ways is the most powerful actor in this whole play, because on the stage of this play, that on the plains of Troy, because she's the one who actually started this. She's the cause of the Trojan War. Aphrodite is the cause of the Trojan War. If I think, in my understanding of the mythology, without her boon, Paris and Helen never fall in love. Helen stays in Sparta with a much more boring husband. The world goes on as normal. We're deprived of a magnificent piece of literature and one of the greatest stories in all of human history, which has now survived 3,000 or 4,000 years. It has survived the rise and fall of many civilizations. We're still making movies about it. We're still inspired by it. And even though the subject of the story is really Mars, right, and war and feats of arms, we should always take a step back and remind ourselves, why are we here? And we're here because of the power of love. And so coming back to, and the power of Aphrodite, the power of Eros, the power of Cupid. And so I love looking at literature and how we can combine mythology and astrology and get a better understanding of the human experience, because this is all here to inform us about how to live better and how to live with more wisdom and more clear intention. Because Venus in astrology points to how we use the power of love. Someone like Aphrodite, she would probably have about 5 planets in Taurus. Maybe something in Gemini that made her very clever, right, and flirtatious, and almost enjoying making trouble and hatching plots and making people fall in love. And so, at least in a Christian morality, we would say she's immoral. She's creating infidelity. She's creating chaos and violence. And yet somehow the darkness of this play creates beauty, not just in the moment, in the bedroom between Paris and Helen, but for all of human history. Well, not all of human history, but for the last 3,000 years, it's given us beauty. It's given us the beauty of the Iliad. It's given us the backdrop for great heroes and great feats of heroism and beautiful literature and beautiful movies. It gives us something to think about, some sort of richness for our civilization and our mind. And so even today, in every day, and for every person, trying to understand what Venus is in your life is really important. And some people are carried away with chaos and romance and passion, and they fall into a great deal of suffering. Because even though in this case, I'm talking about all the beauty that's come out of it, it's equally true that thousands and thousands and thousands of men, women, and children died in this war unnecessarily. It wasn't necessary. Can we look back 3,000 years later and say that was a worthwhile sacrifice for humanity to have this beautiful Homeric literature? Yeah, we can say that. But in the moment, watching thousands of people die, watching your friends die on the plains of Troy, we can also say Venus caused this violence. Venus caused this hell. And so looking in our own lives in astrology, and you don't even need astrology to do this, but it could help. But just the understanding, the intuition of how Venus and love operates in the human experience and the human condition can help us, even if you don't know anything about astrology. And the question is, I think, where do you find balance in your life? Because Venus is an important player on the stage of life. Venus is the heart, and Venus is love of beauty. Are you spending all your resources on fruitless romantic endeavors? Are you spending all of your time and resources on finding new lovers and just sort of feeding your passion for lust and romance? If you're doing that, your story's not going to end well. But similarly, if you're not giving any of yourself to love, if you're not giving any of yourself to beauty and romance, your story's probably also not going to end well. You might end up being very successful, but if you don't give any of yourself to love, you might die a very unhappy person, and you might die a very alone person, and you might die feeling that you left a lot of life unlived. You might grow into your old age with a lot of regrets. And so it's really easy to go to extremes. And I think most people go to extremes. Most people either go towards the extreme of being consumed by passion and irrational decisions in the name of love, Or they go to the extreme of saying, I don't want anything to do with that. It just causes problems, it causes chaos. And to them, I would also say, well, out of chaos comes a lot of beauty. Out of chaos comes growth. Out of chaos comes love. Out of chaos comes self-transformation. So if you have the instinct to go towards discipline and austerity and work, building wealth, maybe you should think about giving more of yourself, not just to your love life, but to the pursuit of beauty, to allow chaos to unfold in your life a little bit, to let uncertainty come into your world and see what comes of that, because God can bring a lot of beautiful things out of chaos. If we're locking our life down so strongly and making it so rigid, there's only so much God can do to bring in new things and new beauty into our world. And again, on the flip side, if you're consumed by passion and chaos, you have no foundation. There's nothing you can build on. You're building your house on sand. If you don't have any self-control, if you don't have any loyalty or ability to be faithful to your partner, if you don't have any restraint, if you don't have any ability to hold down a job or make money or build a life, likewise, you're going to be equally unhappy. But I think ultimately, there's no better or worse on the extreme. It's just if you're on one extreme, work towards the center. And so this is the power of Venus. This is the power of Venus in literature, in astrology, in mythology. And again, Venus is, in a yogic sense, one of the most important planets because it's connected to the heart. And I think it behooves us all to reflect on where we are at in our heart. And it's worth noting that Venus also has a lot to do with the home and the family, because with Venusian grace comes more family peace, family harmony, family beauty, beauty in the home, beautiful decorations in the home. So this is my take on Greek mythology as it relates to Venus and astrology and the human life. And I think that if you are interested in astrology, I really recommend you get into mythology, and probably particularly Greek mythology. Just buy a book of Greek myths and start reading a little bit about the stories of Aphrodite and see where that leaves you.